This is going to be another AD&D Toolkit video. Not so much on Toolkit, but more talking about classes. And I'm focusing this one on multi-class and dual classing characters. It's designed for people who are new to AD&D First Edition or 1E. So let's get into it. So there's, as I said, multi-classing and dual classing. Two very different things in future editions of Dungeons and Dragons, which I have not played, spoke to a lot of people about, and done a little bit of reading on over recent times. I believe there's only multi-classing, and so that's what newer D&D players are familiar with. Dual classing is a whole new concept to them, so we're going to get into the differences of the two. Multiclassing is only available to non-human characters. So we're going to open up the player's handbook here for first edition. I think page 14 is the first one I want to get to. So for multiclassing, that's basically where you have your four main archetypal. I guess there's actually five archetypes, arguably even six in first edition. So you have your cleric class and subclass, fighter class and subclasses, magic user, thief, and then the monk would be the fifth. The sixth I had alluded to is a bard, which is actually not even listed or discussed amongst all of the other classes. It's kind of like a little appendix at the end of the player's handbook. Almost introduced parenthetically that the authors, I think, knew it was a wild concept. Bards, at a very high level, I really do like them. I've played some video games where they're implemented very well. It was an old game. I was just talking in our community Discord chat that we have every couple of weeks to a couple of the guys and telling them about an old game I used to play online, Shadowbane. And I think they really handled the bard class well. It was roguish, light armor, could handle weapons, and it did have some spell work, or actually significant amount of spell work that was really more magical music playing, which is just a matter of mechanics. It doesn't really pragmatically change the impact they had, whether it was musically based or just pure, say, evocative or conjuring magic. But in any case, they were music based, and the magic was primarily what you would call a support character. They provided buffs and debuffs to comrades and enemies. And so by themselves, they really couldn't do very much. They weren't very powerful, but they could seriously augment other characters or debuff enemy characters. So the stronger the party that a bard was with, the more powerful the bard's impact became, because they could amplify those already powerful characters. So I really like the way they handled the bard. Here in first edition, I'm going to argue it was the messiest, possibly I could say worst rendition of a bard in all of Dungeons and Dragons. It's difficult, very, very difficult to qualify for, very difficult to reach end game with. It's just, anyway. Yeah, so I don't generally don't even allow it in my games. A lot of DMs don't. Some do. But so we have these major archetypes. And the reason I'm starting on this table here is because this is showing you some level caps for DEMI-HUMAN races. And I know this is not our race video, but it does pertain to multiclassing, and I'm going to show you how. So again, as I said, multi-class characters are not allowed to be humans. They have to be demi-humans. And so we want to look at this racial class table here, because what it's showing us is what certain races, which are at the top row here, what their maximum levels attainable are for the class. Anything that you see in parentheses only pertains to NPCs, meaning player characters can't even choose that race. So a cleric cannot, a player cleric cannot be a dwarf or elf or gnome. They can only be a half elf, half orc, or human. Halfling, it just flat out says no. So no means, again, does not qualify at all. So what we're really looking for are these U values, which mean unlimited, and there's only a couple of them. Otherwise numbers, which is the max level this class can attain at this race. So for instance, a cleric who is a half-elf can rise to a maximum level of 5, which is pretty darn low. Half-orc is even worse, only 4. And where this comes into play with multiclassing is, again, because you have to be demi-human to multiclass, you're going to have level limits on both of your, or all 3 of your classes, regardless of what race or multiclass configuration you choose. They're all limited. It's a matter of how strictly they're limited. So for instance, a cleric fighter, I want to say, no, I'm going to be guessing here. Could be wrong, so don't hold me to it, but let's say a half-elf can be a cleric fighter. So a half-elf cleric fighter could only rise to level 5 as a cleric and a level 8 as a fighter. And you'll see this little footnote of 4 here. It might be difficult to read that because it's a little blurry. But 4 tells us half-elven fighters of less than 17 strength are actually limited to 6th level instead of 8. If they have 17 strength, they can rise to 7th level. They need 18 strength to max out at the full 8th level of a fighter. So if you have a half-elf character, half-elf cleric / fighter multiclass with only a 16 strength, they're going to be a max level 5 cleric and max level 6 fighter. So very limiting. So you want to review this table when choosing the multiclass characters. Next thing I wanted to touch on with multiclass is, I believe, here. All right, so the benefits, or some of the obvious benefits of being multiclass, is that you can do many things in one character, and most of the typical archetypes cannot do that. For instance, a fighter take a lot of damage, they can wear all the best armor and weapons, but that's their niche. They aren't really magical at all. They don't heal. Their bread and butter is swinging a sword, shooting bows, that kind of stuff. Tanking up front for the party, attracting and taking on and absorbing damage so that the squishier characters can get their spells off and whatnot. When you multi-class, you can kind of get best of both worlds. You could play a fighter, mage, or magic user type character. And when you do that, you have the benefits of the fighter, that you can wear heavy armor and fight with heavy weapons and get better hit points and better attack tables, while at the same time you can cast mage spells, which sounds super OP, probably too much so, right? So there are strict limitations on some of those classes, and a big part of those limitations are those level caps I just was showing you earlier. But there's some other considerations that we're going to get into. But so for the moment, I just want to tackle that subject I was just covering, where if you play 2 classes, you can kind of get the benefits of both into one character, which is fantastic, but there are, again, a couple of limits. One of them is any thief multi-class characters. If you want to perform the functions of a thief, hiding in shadows, picking locks, that sort of stuff, you're limited by the thief's armor requirements. So the best armor they can wear is leather, nothing more protective than that. Can't use shields. So yeah, you get the benefit of the weapons of a fighter and the attack tables of a fighter, and multiple attacks per round as they level up of a fighter, but you can't wear the armor or shields of a fighter if you want to perform those thief functions. And let's face it, that's the primary point of becoming a multi-class thief. I believe thieves are the only multi-class that are limited in that way. For instance, clerics have some major limitations on the weapons they can use, but a multi-class cleric who has fighter as one of their multi-classes can use any weapons, and intrinsically they can use any armor and shields. So they can be very potent because you gain the spell capacity of clerics, which are fantastic, but you're still a fighter. So as far as class limitations, there really isn't much there. They're fantastic. It's the other tangentials that play into kind of limiting them, the max levels they can attain, and things of that nature. So while we are here, the next thing I wanted to show is hit dice and calculating hit points. You're going to see that here in this section. So for some reason, a lot of people seem to get confused with calculating hit points, or at least in my experience, anecdotally, calculating hit points for multi-class, but it's pretty simple. So let's say we have a fighter mage, fighter magic user type. That's the multi-class for this character. So when that character levels up, you're going to roll the d10, because that's what fighters roll for hit points. And you're going to roll the d4, because that's what the magic user rolls. You're going to total those two together. So let's say on the d10 you get a 5, on the d4 you get a 2, so that's going to be a 7 total. You add to that 7 any constitution bonuses. So let's say you have 16 constitution, I think gives you a +2 on your hit dice. So you're going to apply that. Your constitution bonuses then, with the roll that you made, get divided by the number of classes you have. In this case, it's 2, fighter magic user. And then you round off. You round to the nearest integer. So if it's, let's say, 9.5, you're going to reduce it to 9 hit points. And if it's 9.7, you're going to round up. Easy enough. And that's the hit points that that character then gains for that level. So again, it's just rolling each of the die for each of the classes, totaling them up, adding your constitution bonus, and then dividing by the number of classes you have in that multi-class character. And that can be 2 classes or 3, right? You can have a fighter magic user, or you can have a fighter cleric magic user. In the case of a fighter cleric magic user, you're going to roll 10 for the fighter, 8 for the cleric, 4 for the magic user, total them up, add your constitution bonus, and then divide by the number of classes. And that's pretty much it. When you do that every time they attain a level. While we're on the subject of XP and leveling, multi-class characters, they have to divide whatever experience they gain in half, or in thirds in the case of 3 classes. And that experience has to be doled out equally to those classes. Now, if you remember earlier, I was talking about the potential of a half-elf cleric fighter. A half-elf cleric fighter, let's say with a strength of 18, so they can rise to a max level of 5 as a cleric and 8 as a fighter. When that multi-class character gets to 5/5, so a level 5 cleric and a level 5 fighter, and they get more XP, you're going to divide that in half. Half goes to the cleric side, half goes to the fighter side. The cleric can no longer level. They're stuck at level 5 because they're a half-elf. But they still absorb half of the total XP earned on an adventure. So, effectually, you are cutting your future XP in half for that character forever, at that point forward, because only half is going to the fighter, which can still level, and the other half is just absorbed and lost into the ether. So another great limitation for multi-class characters. Now, some DMs do away with those level limits. I'm not a fan of that. Some DMs also don't require that you split your XP evenly. They allow you to decide consciously and declare where you're going to apply it. I don't like either of those. Everybody plays differently. Um, but again, we started this conversation talking about there's a lot of benefit to multiclassing, like for instance that fighter mage character. So you got a mage that can actually wear armor, use weapons, and all of that kind of stuff. Get the fighter attack tables, multiple attacks per round, and cast spells. So in my mind, you need some limits to that, and the limits are level caps, having to split your XP evenly, and so forth. So I'm a fan of the way they designed it within the core manual. Again, here's our weapon and armor chart for classes. So when you're multi-classing, you're going to take the best case scenario out of your classes. So for Cleric Fighter, when it comes to weapons, Fighter has the best case, the best use case. They can use any weapons. So that applies to the Fighter Cleric multi-class. If you are a Cleric magic user, I'm not even sure, honestly, if that's an allowable class. We're going to get to that shortly. They do have Cleric Thieves. So in that case, you would compare the Cleric weapons and the Thief weapons, and you can use best case of that.
Flame from XDS 8960.
But otherwise, that's where this table will come in to effect for you with multiclassing, to figuring out what armor and weapons your multiclass character can use. Then I think I wanted to go on to page 32 here. And just wanted to point out, I think I had mentioned this earlier. Here we go. Cleric combinations. If Cleric is combined with a fighter, they can use the weaponry of a fighter. And so I talked about this earlier. Yeah, I did mention it when I was talking about how any multiclass characters with a Thief. Thief is the only multiclass that I believe is limited by equipment. If you want to perform thieving abilities, you can't use shields, you have to have leather armor. Other classes don't retain those limitations when it comes to weapons and armor, in that Cleric fighter types can use the weapons of a fighter. Fighter magic user types can use the armor and weapons of a fighter, even though there's a magic user, in there, in the mix, not a problem. Right, and so from here, I want to go on to dual classing. Actually, right before I do, they do list all of the multi-class combinations available here on pages 32 and 33 of the Player's Handbook. And each of these combinations have certain allowable races that can play them. That's listed at the end of each paragraph. You'll see, for instance, Fighter, Magic User, Thief. Only elves and half-elves can be that multi-class combination. And they list them out for each of the multi-class possibilities. I think there might be 13 of these combinations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, 13 multi-class combinations you can play. Dual classing. Similar in some regards to multi-class, but they're very different. So dual classing can only be humans, where multi-class has to be not human or demi-human. Dual classing requires that you are a human. Dual classing is less common than multi-classing. It's difficult. It's a long road before it pays off. And these are the reasons why. Dual classing is covered right here on page 33. It's all encapsulated in just a few paragraphs. So not too tricky to learn and read about, tricky to implement. So in order to be a character that dual classes, you don't even, this is not something you would even declare up front. You can prepare for it, but you don't need to declare it up front. You just pick a class like you normally would. You're a human, you pick a single class. Let's say you want to pick Magic User. At some point in your career, you're going to say, I'm going to stop being a Magic User, and now I'm going to be a fighter. Okay, this is where we have the fighter magic user multiclass. Well, this is going to be a magic user only and is human. And at some point decides they want to switch to becoming a fighter and let go of their past, at least for now, of being a magic user. In order to do that, you choose the level at what point you want to do that at. Let's say at level 5, I have a magic user character. Level 5, I want to switch to becoming a fighter as a dual class human. In order to achieve that, I need to have had, or to have currently, a 15 or higher in the ability score of my primary or principal attribute. So for a magic user, that's intelligence. Typically, you're going to have a 15 or better, but not always. So you need to have that 15. What gets worse, though, is the class I want to change into. So a fighter, I now need 17 or 18 in the principal abilities or attributes of that class. Right? And the fighter abilities are not going to be the same as the magic user, which is intelligence. Fighters don't need intelligence. So you need a 15 in that, or better in that intelligence, and then 17 or 18 in the fighter abilities. Very hard to qualify for, depending on the rolling protocol that your DM uses up front. But that in itself, very difficult to achieve. But you might. And if you do at level 5, I can say, all right, I am now switching to a fighter. You're going to keep the hit points you had as that 5th level magic user. But for all other purposes, you're going to now drop in level to level 1 fighter, which is the suck when the rest of your party is level 5 or so, if you're playing in a campaign with a bunch of other players consistently. All right, so there's no limitations on the combos you can do there. So the classes that you're switching from and to. So you could be a cleric who switches to a ranger, or, a magic user who switches to a paladin. Whatever combination you want to come up with is fine. So that's a big benefit of it. But as you can see already, it's difficult to do. When you do make the switch now to fighter, in this example, you still retain the knowledge and the abilities of that magic user, but you're not supposed to use those abilities. If you do, I think it tells, here it tells you. If you start using the abilities of that previous class, the magic user class, for the current adventure that you're on, so let's say you're playing a module, so for the extent of that module, you cannot gain experience. You forfeit all of the experience that you would have gained for this adventure because you decided to cast that sleep spell, which again is the suck. You're a fighter now, a level 1 fighter. You've got to perform as a fighter, train as a fighter, learn as a fighter. You're a fighter. There is a silver lining. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's long, as I said, it's delayed gratification. It's a long road. And what happens is these two things happen once you reach level 5 as a fighter. So once you attain the level in your new class that you switched from your old class. So that's when this triggers, when these 2 points kick in. So when you reach, or actually you have to exceed the previous level. So when I was a level 5, I switched out a magic user. So when I hit level 6 as a fighter, I can now start gaining hit points again. I can roll the hit die that's appropriate to the new class. So I can roll a D10 now each time I gain a level as a fighter. Fantastic, right? We want to start getting those levels and those HP. And the other thing is, big point here, you can finally take advantage of the abilities and skills of the previous class without penalty. So my 6th level fighter can now cast those mage or magic user spells without penalties. And finally, my dual class choice starts to pay off. So as you can see, dual classing and multiclassing at a very high level seem similar, or maybe even like the same thing to newer players to First Edition, that you have these class combinations, but when you drill down a little bit, they're quite different. Very different how you qualify for them, and big choices to be made. So I hope this video was helpful. Multiclassing and dual classing up front to the new player can seem awesome and like the obvious choice, but I hope we pointed out some of the benefits and, more importantly, some of the limitations of those options so that you can be informed before going into this. Just one other, I guess, rainbow, the silver lining I want to point out for, like, say, dual classing here, is that though when that 5th level magic user does switch to a 1st level fighter now, yeah, it sucks, your 1st level, but do keep in mind, you're going to be likely with a group who does not lose those levels. They're still 5th, 6th level and advancing, going to be fighting 5th and 6th level enemies, going to be getting 5th and 6th level loot, which you will get hopefully if your company is pretty cool, you're going to get a full share of that. So you are going to level up as that fighter much quicker than you did as the magic user. So just again, little silver lining. I don't want to totally deter people from playing these multi-class and dual class options. Just want to put the information out best as I can for you. Hope that's helpful. We like to, at AD&D Toolkit, help promote players getting into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, particularly people coming from newer editions and want to try out the old stuff. I think it's much better, of course, because that's what I play. I'm sure there's 5th edition and 3rd edition people who think those editions are better. But I want to do my part, what I can, to introduce people to the older versions, how they play, why I think they're better, more interesting, more challenging. And you make up your own mind. So again, I hope to see you at the next video. And until then, take care.